This is the Action for Healthy Kids learning session on implementing School Health Advisory Council mandates. We're excited that you're here today. We should have a pretty good sized group. So we'll give everybody a moment to get in. And as you join us, if you could drop into the chat where you're from, what district, what community, and then what role you might play with School Health Advisory Council, or why you're here today if you're not on a council. Takes everybody a little bit to get in. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. You are attending the Implementing School Health Advisory Council mandates learning session with Jasmine Wightman and Michelle Smith. We'll just give everybody one more minute and then we'll get started. Oh, great. It's like we have a great group here. As you're joining, drop in your name and what district you're with, or what organization, and your role with School Health Advisory Councils. And then the Q&A box. Yes, there will be a recording sent after the presentation. We will post this and have a recording that we'll send out by next week, early next week. So, all right, well, let's just go ahead and get started. This workshop is being recorded. Right now, everybody is placed on mute. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the Q&A. You can also put them in the chat, but that's usually we'd like to let people make comments and use that for other purposes. You should be able to hear. If you have a problem with the audio, you can switch to your telephone. So if you just click on the audio button, it will let you have that option. And then we will be sending resources after this. I'm Michelle Smith. I'm with Action for Healthy Kids. We've been around for over 20 years now. We were started when Dr. David Satcher declared an obesity epidemic and brought together teams from all of our states to try to work on a plan to work through schools to help children be healthier, more active. And as we have grown over the years, we've embraced the whole child model, and we work on all aspects of child health, but there's still a special emphasis on nutrition, physical activity, and then social emotional health as well. You can visit our website. There are lots of tip sheets on different topics. We do offer some webinars like this one, as well as other training opportunities. And then we have some grants that we award out to districts. This year, we've been partnering with USDA and just announced grants, 19 of which are in Texas, for small and rural communities to improve their nutrition program. So we're really excited to be partnering with USDA on that. As I mentioned, I'm Michelle Smith, and we have presenting today Jasmine Wightman, who is the senior attorney with legal services for the Texas Association of School Boards. So I am going to turn this over to Jasmine, and welcome and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge. It is all yours.
Thank you. I'm just going through the sharing of the screen. Can you see my slides, Michelle?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome. As she said, My name is Jasmine Wightman. I'm with the Texas Association of School Boards. I'm a lead attorney here. I have been with TASB for over 10 years. Before that, I was a teacher, an elementary school teacher. I'm also a parent, and I'm also somebody that really cares about student health and health of our children in general. And so part of that is I advise here in TASB, I advise school districts on a number of issues, and one of those is student health. I give trainings across the state. This is kind of part of that outreach and that part of those trainings today. So I'm really excited to be talking to you all. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is TASB, because I know that there's some people that maybe are less traditional of our training participants that are on this call. TASB stands for the Texas Association of School Boards, and districts can choose to be members of TASB, and with that membership, they get a variety of services. And some of those services that are most applicable are our legal frameworks and our local policies. So you might have seen a district's local policy before, particularly if you are, working in the district. And I'm going to show some of those local policies today. And you can know that they come from TASB, but they are adopted by the school board and amended by the school district. And so we'll talk about that today. We also produce a model student handbook, a model student code of conduct, a lot of FAQs. We have a team over here of about 9 attorneys, and we work to serve across the state to kind of provide statewide level guidance. So the policy service and TASB legal services work closely together, like I said, for your legal frameworks and your local policies. And if you've clicked into your district's policy manual, you might have seen what's there on the screen, that drop down to, there's drop downs about your SHAC policies, but there's also policies on everything from employment to student discipline. We have our legal framework, which is the law that is kind of a summary of the law that applies. And then we have our local policies, which are our local decisions. And so when I show those on the screen today, sometimes I might be showing a legal framework or a local policy, and I'll clarify which. We have other resources. We have model forms to help districts. We have, like I mentioned, the handbooks, and we collaborate with other stakeholders when we're creating these resources to make them the most useful we can for school districts. So today we're going to talk, of course, about the SHAC, and we're going to go through the legal requirements, and we're going to specifically spend some time on human sexuality instruction and instruction on abuse prevention. Those are we have some more recent laws, not from this latest legislative session, but the session before that in 2021, that really changed the duties of the SHAC and really changed the meetings of the SHAC. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The bulk of our time will be spent on SHAC requirements. And then at the end, I have some new health laws. One of them implicates the SHAC, and some are just more general for your knowledge about some student health and what the legislature did in the latest legislative session. And we'll go through some other notes. So let's talk about the SHAC requirements first, the basics. So as you know, the SHAC is appointed by the board, and the board is required by law to appoint at least 5 members, and the majority of those members must be parents. On the screen, it says BDF. BDF is your legal policy. If you ever wanted to see the legal framework, a summary of the law as it applies to the appointing of the SHAC, you would look at that BDF policy. The other members of the SHAC could include teachers, administrators, counselors, students can be on the SHAC. Healthcare professionals. I saw, when y'all were putting in the chat where you're from, I saw that some of you are school nurses and things like that. Even law enforcement can be on your SHAC. Now, the meetings requirements really were amended in the 2021 legislative session. So the SHAC has to meet 4 times a year, but after the latest, not the latest, but after the 2021 legislative session, those meetings have to be public meetings. Now, it's not that they have to be public meetings exactly in the same way that the school board meets. The school board has to comply with a law called the Open Meetings Act, whereas SHACs, they have their meeting requirements that are specifically written into the SHAC law, but they are very similar to the Open Meetings Act. So for example, the SHAC has to post notice of the date, hour, and place and subject of the meeting 72 hours before they meet. That's kind of the same for school boards under the Open Meetings Act, that 72-hour requirement. The SHAC also has to make an audio or video recording of the meeting and maintain the minutes. And the recording and the minutes have to be on the district website within 10 days. So this was a big difference in 2021, the idea that these meetings were going to be recorded. I know for some people that was surprising and even a little uncomfortable because, you know, a lot of the people in the SHAC are volunteers, and it's not quite the same as, you know, an elected official like a school board, but this is what our legislator gave us. They really wanted the transparency of our SHAC meetings. And so there is some benefit for public transparency for parents in these high interest areas. So how to post the agenda for the SHAC meetings. Your district administration is pretty familiar. At this point, they've been posting for the school board in a very similar way. I think that these are local processes, but I would reach out to maybe the superintendent secretary does the posting, or you have somebody else in your district, and ensure that these are being posted on the district website and posting notice of what's going to be discussed, where the meeting is going to happen. There is a sample agenda in the Department of State Health Services SHAC guidebook. I don't know if y'all have seen this guidebook, but it's very helpful and has been updated since the changes in the legislative session, I believe. But there's a sample agenda in there. So what is the SHAC going to do? Well, in those 4 meetings, or maybe more meetings if you know your district needs that, they have a number of things that the statute, the law is going to require them to do. And if you wanted to look at that legal summary, you would look in EHAA, the legal framework for EHAA, and these slides will be turned into a PDF and shared with you. So, you know, don't feel like you have to write that down. But if you wanted to see, you know, what is the law on the SHAC, that is where you would look. So the SHAC is going to give recommendations about health education, of course, including physical and mental health, policies, strategies, and curriculum for health concerns, you know, collaboration with community organizations, school health services. And then we have written into statute strategies to increase parental awareness, or I'm sorry, strategies for appropriate grade levels and methods of instruction for human sexuality instruction, abuse prevention instruction, and opioid abuse addiction, that should say addiction, and opioid antagonist instruction. So that last bullet there is a little bit newer, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So what resources do we have for SHACs? As I mentioned, you have a legal framework at EHAA that is going to describe the duties of the SHAC. We also have on our eSource website FAQs about the SHAC. One of those is the FAQ on the SHAC and the adoption of instructional material. And that goes through some of the things I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you a little kind of flow chart thing today that is in that FAQ and available publicly on our website to help for guidance. And there's kind of what that FAQ looks like. It's just a PDF starting with what is the SHAC. Here is the kind of graphic that's in that FAQ that talks about the requirements for human sexuality instruction and walks through the process for how districts can adopt their human sexuality instruction. And so it actually doesn't start with the SHAC, it starts with the school board, and the school board is going to have a policy about the adoption of materials on human sexuality instruction. TASB has a sample one that most districts have. From that policy, then the board also takes the next step. The board is going to adopt a resolution that convenes the SHAC. So the board is who says, you know, the SHAC needs to get together to determine our human sexuality instruction curriculum recommendations. So we have that board policy, then the board adopts a resolution. Now it goes to the SHAC, and the SHAC has to hold at least 2 public meetings on human sexuality instructional materials and curriculum. These have to follow those requirements that we went through to be public and to be recorded. Then the SHAC is going to make a recommendation to the school board after they review the curriculum and they have their recommendations, and the school board will vote on the SHAC's recommendation. It needs to be a record vote at a public meeting. And then from there, that's kind of, the district, the SHAC and the board have done their duty. Now it's going to get to, the kind of the campus level where we have our parents that have to be notified about the district's offering of the instruction, and there's notification about, prior to the instruction beginning, specific notification, and that parents have that chance to opt into instruction instead of opting out of instruction. So this is different. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that, especially there's been some questions about that throughout the past couple of years. So again, this slide is just about the SHAC holding those public meetings before adopting the human sexuality instruction. Now, for the opt-in, so the request for consent for the instruction has to be provided to the parents not later than the 14th day before instruction begins, and it can't be included with any other notification or request for consent. So at the beginning of the school year, we're in this time zone right now where, at the beginning of the school year, you're sending out these notices, you're sending out the student handbook, and it's all kind of coming to parents at once. This notification has to be provided independently and separately of all other notification. And, we have model forms. I believe TASB has a sample consent form in the next slide that I'll show you. And again, that opting in prior to 2021, it was opting out. Parents had the opportunity to opt their students out of sex ed. Now parents have to opt in and choose for their student to receive that instruction and proactively choose. And those curriculum materials, there's some requirements in the law now that they have to be made available online for review. There's already a lot of laws in Texas that make public curriculum accessible and viewable, but this is specifically for human sexuality instruction to make sure that parents can view all of that material. This is a sample consent form for parent consent, in accordance with the EHA local, the district provides the instruction, and it has to, this form says the date that the student will receive the instruction, the date that they need to get the consent back. You can modify them. These are modifiable for the school district can modify them. Not, of course, some of you are parents and you wouldn't do this end, but this is where the district is working to make sure that that required communication is getting to parents. So then we had, during a special session, we had another law pass about abuse prevention instruction. And this was actually kind of interesting because there was abuse prevention instruction in the regular 2021 session, and it passed. And then the governor vetoed the abuse prevention instruction at that time because he thought there wasn't enough parental involvement and wanted to give parents the right, similar to human sexuality instruction, to opt their students into instruction instead of opting out. So this came out of a special session, a few months after we had our human sexuality instruction requirements. And it is almost a copy and paste of the law. In fact, I don't need to go through this process because it's almost exactly the same for your human sexuality instruction, where the SHAC is going to have these public meetings and they're going to, make that recommendation to the board on abuse prevention instruction. And then the, same thing for opting in and parent notification. There are some key differences between human sexuality instruction and abuse prevention instruction. That when you are sending a notice about human sexuality instruction, you have to give a general schedule about when the instruction is going to be provided. And then for abuse prevention instruction, it specifically says the school board must determine the content, including the TEKS. And it's interesting that abuse prevention instruction references the TEKS, the state standards for learning, whereas human sexuality instruction does not. However, there are state standards, TEKS, for both human sexual that touch on human sexuality topics and touch on abuse prevention topics. So that is one of the biggest questions we get is about those human sexuality TEKS. So I do have some FAQ type things where I'll talk about those. I'm going to stop for a second because I see something in the Q&A.
It's just, no, it's not.
Recording. Okay. Okay, great. I want to make sure I'm not going too fast, and my email will be available to y'all as well if you have questions about this. So this is EHAA. This is the local policy on the abuse prevention instruction. I said your board has to adopt a policy. This is TASB's model language. It really doesn't say anything extra. When we create our local policies for school districts, we really try to stick to what's statutorily required and not put a lot of extra in. So this just kind of describes the process, similar to that flow chart, but in policy form. And we have that same policy on human sexuality instruction because they're pretty much the copy and paste of the language. Your EHA local policy is going to have very similar language for both types of instruction. For just some other information about abuse prevention instruction, which is, I call it abuse prevention instruction. The longer title is instruction on abuse, dating violence, and sex trafficking prevention. That's just a mouthful to say every time, so I shorten it to abuse prevention instruction. But it does need to touch on all of those items. And so the bill that had those instructional requirements for the SHAC has some other things with regard to dating violence. So for example, your dating violence policy in the district has to be found in the district improvement plan. And then the district has to have reporting procedures and guidelines. This isn't so much a SHAC responsibility, but just to know that there were other requirements in that law that changed how the SHAC's going to make those recommendations to ensure that dating violence is kind of prioritized, that they're really thinking through in the district how to report it and how to kind of prevent future instances. This is the local policy on dating violence, and it goes through what is dating violence and that it is prohibited harassment and some examples as well. Okay, so that was kind of these SHAC basic requirements, a little bit simpler. I hope that was a review for most of you that are returning SHAC members. But of course, things are not always quite so cut and dry. And so we're going to go through some of the frequently asked questions that we have had in the past couple of years about abuse prevention instruction and human sexuality instruction.
There is one quick question.
Sure, yeah.
Is there a policy on how the parent notification and opt-in forms need to be distributed?
There is not a local policy on that. The legal framework that will kind of tell you that it needs to go out 14 days before and needs to be sent out independently. So if you wanted to see that, you would look in the legal framework to see that language. The details beyond that are going to be locally decided by your district, and it's more procedures. So at TASB, we call it policy big P, which is like this board adopted policy, but your district does so many things that are kind of that like smaller version of policy that is more like procedural. And those will be really dependent on how your district distributes things, how they get things out to parents. So those procedures are more local, and I would reach out to your district administration to see how are we getting this out. But if you wanted to see that law, that is in the legal policy, the legal framework. Cool. So our FAQ, some of the questions we've received, the biggest question we've received, the most kind of controversial, is are districts required to teach human sexuality or abuse prevention instruction? We know that students are not necessarily required to receive the instruction because the parents can specifically decide they are not opting in. It's a little bit confusing with human sexuality instruction because there's a part of the law that makes it sound like the board gets to decide whether you're teaching human sexuality instruction. However, there are TEKS, there are state standards that are undoubtedly human sexuality instruction, and there are TEKS that are abuse prevention instruction as well. The human sexuality instruction and abuse prevention instruction TEKS are in the health TEKS. There are people on here that are definitely more of an expert in the health TEKS than I am, but I've reviewed some of these TEKS, and they are undoubtedly human sexuality instruction because they talk about reproductive health, they talk about relationships, they talk about sexual diseases, STDs, is in the TEKS, as is the process of pregnancy. And so these are undoubtedly in the TEKS. When it comes to our health standards, human sexuality instruction starts, is it fourth or fifth grade? You guys probably know even better than me, but it starts kind of in late elementary. Of course, it gets much more complicated as we go through middle school and high school, gets more detailed. In high school, health is not necessarily required class for graduation, but it is a requirement to offer health instruction because it's part of the enrichment curriculum. So districts are required to offer human sexuality instruction and abuse prevention instruction because districts are required to offer health TEKS. And in K through 8, health TEKS are part of the curriculum that all students will receive unless they've opted out. I hope that, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but I hope that clarifies a little bit. Now, I will say there are districts that have decided not to teach human sexuality instruction. And that is a decision that they have made probably with an attorney, with their local council, weighing the different risks. And part of that risk is the community response and all of that. We advise here that, the TEKS are required to be taught as a law, but I know that there are other districts that have a different risk analysis that they're taking. So just acknowledging that. So how does the SHAC know which TEKS require this process? I have received that question and I send them directly to probably some of the people that are on this call, those curriculum specialists or educators that specialize in this. TEA has been asked. I have sent emails, other people have sent emails after this bill first passed saying, can you point out which TEKS are going to require this process? But I think it is going to be up to the district to look at those TEKS and find the overlap. Some science curriculum involves human organ systems and the bill says reproductive health is included. So I do think that is something for our curriculum specialists to look at. I haven't tried to reach out to TEA in a while. It might be worth trying to reach out again, but they haven't really clarified when a human sexuality instruction TEK is going to trigger all of these requirements. We've also asked for recommended curriculum that it's going to meet the requirements for parent accessibility. The idea, there's some copyright requirements and all of that. We don't recommend curriculum at TASB, so we don't really have anything, but you have the chat here. If you have an excellent curriculum, feel free to share it with each other in the TAC that it's helping you meet all the TEKS and helping you meet those requirements that parents can access that material. And, we have been asked about the consequences for not following the SHAC laws. As I mentioned, districts have a risk analysis and if a district doesn't teach every single TEK, there's not necessarily the TEKS police that are going to come and say, you didn't teach this state standard, but it is the law. With the SHAC too, there's not really a SHAC police that's going to say, you didn't, you gave 71 hours notice instead of 72 hours, you didn't meet the 72-hour notice deadline. But, and since it's not the OMA has penalties, including some criminal penalties, those are not going to apply to districts. But when a district fails to follow the law, a few things that can happen that districts should weigh in their risk analysis and we will always advise to follow the law. Some of the things that can happen, the first thing is really bad press and community distrust, especially for some of these SHAC laws that are meant to, work with parents and provide transparency, and especially in these sensitive areas of instruction. So I think one of the biggest consequences would be, kind of breaking that trust with your community. The AG releases opinions that kind of have the force of law and can interpret the law. So if someone's taking kind of a riskier area, a riskier decision on the law, the AG can issue opinion that can cause bad press. There could be a court injunction that requires the district to stop doing something or to start doing something. And TEA has the right to investigate districts that aren't following the law, as well as to put sanctions on districts when they aren't following the law. I have not seen that with the SHAC. I don't think that would be any of the first steps, but of course, following the law is going to be the safest, smartest decision. And even before it, if it was some, really some SHAC members that were not necessarily following the law, I think one of the first things that would happen is the board would remove those SHAC members that weren't following the law, because the school board, of course, doesn't want to get to any of those negative consequences. If a district has outside organizations that want to present after school, does approval go to the SHAC? So if it's something that is not part of the school curriculum, it's not part of instruction, and it doesn't necessarily apply. All of these laws aren't going to apply. Now, your district has a policy in the GK series that talks about non-school use of school facilities and distributing non-school literature, which could be the pamphlets or whatever they're doing. So you have policies in place that address that kind of separately. The SHAC doesn't really have any responsibility for these organizations. I will say that, districts need to be, aware of the sensitive nature and try and make decisions, that really show a lot of transparency for parents. And that goes into kind of the bigger picture. But the SHAC isn't necessarily part of those decision-making processes. It's more the district's local visitor policies and community facility use policies. What happens if very few parents opt into instruction? So this is more of a district concern, because the SHAC still has to go through recommending the curriculum. And then the district at that point, the board has approved the curriculum and all of the decisions that the board is supposed to do. Then it kind of goes to that district to give the notice and the parent opt in and opt out. So that's more for the district administration to kind of handle, and less of the SHAC's role when you have very few parents opting into instruction. I think that, even if it's just a few, the district still has to offer that instruction, because it's the TEKS, right? And so, district is required to offer under the enrichment curriculum, the health TEKS, and so they should still offer it. I see 2 questions in the Q&A. I'm going to pop that open. They're
relating to charter schools. And were there any new laws that requiring charter schools to have a SHAC? I know there was some pending.
Charter schools are still not required to have a SHAC. Is that helpful?
Yes. Yeah. So that didn't get passed.
No.
Okay, because both of those questions were regarding charter schools.
Yeah, that did not happen. So what I talked about now, if you still have questions, you want to read it, you want to see kind of my response in writing, a lot of these questions are in that FAQ. Okay, and so for the next 12 or so minutes, we'll talk about some of the new health laws. And this is more informational, kind of general than SHAC responsibility. But I think in terms of when you want to know what the legislator did for student health, I think these are part of that answer. So the first one does have a little bit of a SHAC implication here. So fentanyl abuse prevention, we know that we've seen, an epidemic of especially younger use of, opioid use and just a lot of problems here, sad stories that come out. So districts are required to provide instruction on fentanyl abuse prevention to students in grades 6 through 12. And the SHAC is going to recommend that curriculum. It doesn't have all of the same requirements as we looked at abuse prevention and human sexuality instruction. This is not the same process, but the SHAC is going to play a role in recommending the curriculum on the dangers of opioids. And, even though there's not that opt-in, I will say that in terms of any curriculum taught by the school district, there is an ability in a different statute for a parent to opt out. So you don't have to give the notice and wait for the opt-in for the parent. But if a parent comes to the district and doesn't want their child to receive this instruction on the dangers of opioids, the district is going to have to, allow that student to opt out of that instruction. In addition,
I was going to say, Jasmine, is there a place for districts to go to find curriculum on opioids and fentanyl? Is there, does TEA have any information on that?
I haven't seen any information from TEA on that, and I'm definitely not the right person for curriculum. Yeah. So, I wish I was. I think it's important and fascinating, but if there's anybody on the call in the chat that has, great curriculum for opioid prevention and drug poisoning awareness, please put it in the chat and working with each other. Y'all, there are definitely some more experts on this call than me.
Thanks, Jennifer. Jennifer dropped something in.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Great. So the governor is going to designate Fentanyl Poisoning Awareness Week, and the districts can choose during that week to have some abuse prevention instruction or some activities to kind of increase awareness for students and the communities about this problem. There was another bill, Senate Bill 294. That bill was about unassigned asthma medication for school districts. This is a choice that districts can make if they're going to keep albuterol essentially on campus that isn't in a student specific name, but is available for a student that is having an asthma issue or kind of a respiratory distress issue, that they can use this prescription medicine to help the student without the student having to have this specific prescription. Similar kind of to that EpiPen that some districts can choose to have an EpiPen on campus that doesn't have a student's name on it specifically, but if a student's having that, very dangerous, life-threatening allergic reaction, they don't need to wait for a prescription to help the student with that unassigned medication. And the medication for respiratory distress, there's some requirements for the district, and I think this is interesting. This is the first time I've seen this, where if they give the albuterol or the medication to the student, and the student doesn't have a primary care provider on site, then the district has to give the parents information about choosing a primary care provider. If they do have a primary care provider, then the school has to notify that primary care provider that the medication was administered. So that's a kind of a new responsibility for districts after they've given this medication to give parents information about selecting that. Again, this is an optional policy. Not all districts will keep unassigned medication for respiratory distress on their campus, but there are a number of rules and requirements if they decide to do that. Now, I think this actually does play a little bit into what the SHAC is going to do, because, now the SHAC has some responsibility about opioid abuse prevention and what to do in case of an opioid overdose. Districts are required now by this new law to have a policy for unassigned opioid medication to stop that overdose at each campus in the district that serves students in grades 6 through 12. So now our high schools and our middle schools are going to have this unassigned medication. So if somebody on the campus, doesn't have to be a student, if somebody is having an opioid overdose, they can give that medication to that person quickly. They don't need to have that in the name of a person, even though it is the prescription. So that, again, unassigned medication is available. And this is the first time we've seen unassigned medication that is required for districts to store. The other choices are kind of, the other types of medication, EpiPens and asthma, those are options, but this is required. If the district wants, they can choose to have it at their elementary campuses, at their lower campuses. And that policy deadline is January 1st. TASB has written a sample policy for districts to choose, or of course they can always write their own, but that comes to districts in October. So as you're giving that, as you're thinking about the opioid instruction, you might want to think about like the fact that this is something that could happen on campus, and we have even the medicine on campus. For that campus, for that medication, the person that may administer it needs to be authorized and trained. It can be a volunteer or can be an employee, and they have to be available during regular school hours. So I mentioned we do a lot of FAQs. One of the FAQs that we're working on is talking about the different types of unassigned medication, because there are different hours that that it is required by law to be available. There are different rules about extracurricular activities, and so they all get a little confusing. And one of the things that we try and do at TASB Legal Services is try and kind of unwind some of these confusing things and clarify it and communicate it out to districts. So that is coming soon. If you're, school nurses that I saw that are on the Zoom, that might be something of interest to you. Just a couple more health laws that passed. The concussion oversight team, a licensed chiropractor or physical therapist can now be on that team that decides that a student, helps decide the guidelines first for, when a student can be removed after getting a concussion in athletic activity. a physical therapist under this new law can now remove a student who's got a concussion during practice or competition. So it just kind of expands who can help make these decisions for concussion oversight. Water safety requirements. This is
We have a
activity. Oh, just
sorry, the screen froze for just a second, so you might want to redo that last one.
oh, sorry. And we'll send out a PDF. These are just kind of more FYI. But is that working? Does that say? Okay. And this one says child water safety requirements.
Yes.
Ah, perfect. Okay. So this is about children that are under 12. So this is going to be, 6th grade and below, maybe some 7th grade and below. But when there's a water activity, not just a district, but any sort of governmental division is going to have to make sure that they have an affirmation from the parent that the child can swim. And if the child can't swim, then the school district or whoever the agency is, whether it's, after school care or whatever, they have to provide a life jacket and ensure the child's wearing it. And the exceptions are for competitions and swim instruction when you have supervision. A bill just changed the vision screening. Don't really need to go over that a lot for you all. Management and treatment plan for a seizure disorder has to come in on a TEA form. And so there's some changes to that law. And then lastly, there's a change to the required instruction. Already there's required instruction for students to get CPR instruction, and the legislature just took the AED, the automated electronic defibrillator, and they kind of just tied it into that existing requirement. So now I think this will probably be generally done together. You'll have your CPR instruction, and at the same time, you'll be giving that AED instruction. It's not funded, which, is not great, but the district can accept donations to help fund some of the dummies and the equipment needed for this instruction. 2 quick other updates, and I see I only have 2 minutes, which is good because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here. You may have heard about the library bill. It's also called the Reader Act, and it doesn't apply to foundation and enrichment curriculum. So when I talked about human sexuality instruction, that's going to be our enrichment curriculum. That bill is not going to apply to our curriculum materials. House Bill 1605 is a bill that did change the way that districts are going to get curriculum and have to affirm curriculum. And really, I think in terms of how it's going to apply for a SHAC context is that there's just more for parent review. Again, the legislator is really focused on transparency for what is being taught in our districts. And so there's going to be parent portals, and maybe some of this human sexuality or abuse prevention instruction will be available publicly through those parent portals potentially. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Like I mentioned, fentanyl poisoning and opioid addictions was something the legislator was concerned with, and there's a designated awareness month.
She's frozen again.
Time, for questions. I know we're getting close to 12:15, but
you
just wanted to say thank you so much for your.
You froze after you said awareness month.
Oh no! All right.
Last one.
So I don't know why I'm freezing, but
probably my internet, not you. So there is a question about the seizure form. So that you went over that pretty quickly, and they're not sure what seizure form that is.
Yeah, they can reach out to me separately if there's somebody working in a district. I think that's something of interest mostly to probably a school nurse or a health professional working in a district. So you can email me legal@tasb.org, and I will get you that information. And I just wanted to end to say thank you, everybody that serves on the SHAC. I think your work is incredibly important, keeping students healthy. We know it helps academic success and just makes for a better Texas. So thank you so much. And I am here for questions.
So when will the model handbook and model code of conduct be available?
They were made available to your districts already. So your district has a policy consultant that gets the emails and the communications from TASB, and they've already been made available to districts.
Oh, awesome. Any other questions? Will we get a copy of the slides? We will get a PDF of the slides from Jasmine and send that out with a link to the webinar, so you'll be able to share it and review it as you need to. Any other questions? Where am I to find something that states charter schools are not required SHACs?
I don't know. So at TASB, we don't actually serve charter schools. We do in a different way. So when we write our legal policies and we write our local policies, those aren't available to charter schools. It's come up in the context of districtive innovation, which I don't want to get into, but I don't know if you're going to find something other than looking at the charter school requirements and seeing that the law that requires SHACs is not on the list of requirements. Does that make sense?
There was part of a bill that was introduced to expand and have charter schools required to have a SHAC, and that bill did not get passed.
Yeah.
So nothing has really changed from what it was before when there wasn't a requirement. I do know that there are quite a few charter schools who are going ahead and having a SHAC, and we did a webinar with the Texas Charter School Organization and hosted a couple of the charter schools that have SHACs, and they're really pleased with having that little bit of parent input and being able to focus on the whole child and do some things. So I would check with the charter school organization, the Texas, and they can probably tell you a little bit more because they were watching very closely on that. So if you're interested in knowing more, we did put together a Texas SHAC network. It's at txshacnetwork.com, and then you can also join. You don't have to be a member of a SHAC, but you can join the SHAC network, and we send out information on legislation, on learning sessions, different information. We have information from TASB and TEA on the website as well. All the state laws, as well as national resources, wellness policy information, and then links to the TASB resources that Jasmine mentioned as well. So please visit TexasSHACnetwork.com. Join if you can. This is just a screenshot of some of the things you'll see on that website. And then if you want to visit any webinars, past webinars we've had, you can go to YouTube and look for Healthy Kids, Healthy Families. And we have probably 100 different webinars that are archived there on everything from social emotional health to outdoor play to child nutrition directors, school meals, as well as just basics on school health advisory councils. So feel free to visit that website and as well as YouTube to find resources. And you can always reach out to me. And I'm happy to answer questions or point you in the right direction for where you can get additional information. So anybody else have questions? I had Jasmine end early and she was really on time so that we had plenty of time. There's usually a lot of questions when it comes to this curriculum. Even though it's been out there a couple of years, there's still a lot of questions about how to handle things. So this is your chance. I guess I could have shown my video. You see my smiling face? Well, Jasmine, I don't see any additional questions. So I guess we appreciate all of you joining us today and hope that you got the information you were looking for. If not, please reach out and we'll make sure that we get you the answers you need. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.
All right. Have a great week.